Hi, this is Benjamin Kaplan, the Associate Director of Web Design and Development at Boston University's Center for Digital Imaging Arts. Today I'm going to conclude our review of building a basic page layout with HTML and CSS by going over how to tie up the remaining loose ends, namely drop-down navigation. This is the fourth and final part to this four-part review. So let's dive right in. Where we left off, we had gone ahead and created a simple website with a header, navigation, content, and footer. The content has now been divided into two columns, a left column and a right column, and our navigation now has links that have a pseudo hover state, and all of them are lining up next to one another. So today what we're trying to do is add this drop-down functionality to our navigation. Let's take a look at our HTML code. So here's the code we were left off with. We have our navigation code. We know that we're using an unordered list to create our navigation because of its nested block level structure. Again, we have a block level element, which is an unordered list, with many block level elements inside of them. So what we're going to do first is add another block level element inside of our list, which is basically going to be another list, a new navigation dropdown. So after my first anchor tag ends, but before the list item ends, I'm going to hit return and enter in a new unordered list. Inside of here again, I will have a list item, and inside there I will have an anchor tag. Again, I will put a £sign for right now there so that the link doesn't go anywhere. I will also go ahead and say sublink, and again copy and paste this several times to just save a little bit of time here. Perfect. So now that we have our HTML structure built into place, we need to tap into our CSS knowledge to be able to structure this CSS drop-down navigation. So the first thing we want to keep in mind is if we take a look at our design, we see that this element, which now we understand is actually a child of this list item above it, is clearly breaking outside of its parent element's space over one of the parent element's siblings, in this case, content. So whenever we hear one element overlapping a sibling or a parent's sibling or just its parent, we should immediately think of position absolute, okay? And positioning in general. So whenever we're working with positioning, the first thing we want to take into consideration is what is the quote-unquote positioning parent. So what do we want to actually be the positioning parent for our drop-down menu? Let's take a look. Well, if we look at our code here, we have this unordered list, and all this is inside of a list item. To me, therefore, it seems logical to make this list item, the parent of this unordered list, the positioning parent. So I'm going to go up to my section of my CSS where I've gone ahead and targeted those list items, and I'll add a new property of position and just hit the position is relative. I don't need to go ahead and visually change the way that where this element displays on the page by giving a top, left, bottom, or right. I'm going to leave it right where it is. I'm just telling it it's a positioning parent. Down here I'm going to go ahead and start creating my new selectors. So I have my #nav space ul space li. That's the same as before, only now we have an unordered list inside of there. Just like before, I'm going to go ahead and specify each of the elements that are inside there. So #nav ul li, and then we get one more. #nav space ul space li space ul space li space a. Right? And so in this situation, we have an unordered list that's inside of a list item. That's inside of another unordered list that's inside of an element with an ID of nav. In this situation, we're targeting just the unordered list that's inside that nested list, that's inside of a list item, that's inside of an unordered list that's inside of navigation, and so on. So this time what I want to start by doing is actually starting with my unordered list. I'm going to go ahead and say that the position of this is a position absolute. By not going ahead and specifying a top or a left, this will naturally appear where it should appear in the flow of content. It's just that the elements around it will no longer experience this element's height. Next, I'm going to go ahead and address my list items. Now we know that our list items, by default, are currently floating because they're inheriting this from this rule right here, right? So in this rule right here, we see all list items, not just first level list items, are floating to the left. So down here, I'm going to change that, and I'm going to say that these guys are floating none. In my anchor, I still want these guys to display block. I also want them to have, based on my design, a slightly different background color, a border on the bottom, and a different font color. Border dash bottom. 1 pixel, solid 555. Color of pound 555, and we're getting pretty close. Now, one of the things that's interesting to look at, if we look at our design again, is we notice that the drop-down menu has a set width to it. So because of this, we're going to want to define the width of how big this is. So in my code over here, I'm going to say width, and I will say something like 175 pixels. You may also notice that I have a border dash right on this element of 2 pixels solid and then a color like this right here. The unordered list is also the element that has the background color, which is pound CCC. Let's go ahead and take a look at what this is looking like currently. If I refresh, there it is. It's showing up more or less the way I'd like it to. I still have a solid line next to my first line, and that's because I forgot to go ahead and take off the declared border right for these nested list items. So I can go ahead and say border dash right 0 pixels. Now here I currently put this border on my anchor, which may not have been the most strategic move because I don't actually want the border to be clickable. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that and bring it onto my list item. Now my list item has the border and not the anchor. Let's take a look at what this looks like. There they are. We might need to adjust our hover state, but we can address that in a moment. So to tackle the hover state, we'd come to here, repeat our rule, and target the hover pseudo class. Go ahead and target our background color and our font color. We know the background starts off as pound CCC, so we'll just go a little bit darker. And a little bit lighter than the font color, which I believe jumps to EEE, so we'll go for something like CCC. Let's see what this looks like. Nah, it's not so great. Let's go to white instead. There we go. Looks good. So the last part we really need to worry about is how to make it so that this menu only appears when we hover over the link. So to do this, we're going to adjust this feature of display. So the unordered list we want by default to actually display none. Now when we want this to display is only when we're hovering over a list item. In this case, the first level list item. So down here at the very bottom of my code, I'm going to create a new rule, pound nav, space ul, space li. That's what I actually want to do the hovering on, colon hover. And once I've hovered on it, I want to target the unordered list. And the only thing I need to change here is the display to block. Come back to my site and refresh, and now only when I hover over the list item, or one of its children, do I go ahead and see this hovering effect. What's great about using these general contextual selectors is that now I don't need to add a class or a special ID to my list item or my unordered list, and I could literally go ahead and copy this entire list and just paste it onto any of my list items. I'll go ahead and do that for each. Save this, come back to my page and refresh. I now have a drop-down navigation under each of my list items. So that concludes these tutorials on a basic brush up for general page layouts. Again, my name is Benjamin Kaplan. I'm the Associate Director of Web Design and Development at Boston University's Center for Digital Imaging Arts, and this is one of the many really cool things that we cover within our curriculum. If you're interested in learning more, feel free to visit us online at www.cdiabu.com, or also feel free to keep an eye out for future YouTube videos that we post.